Today's topic is the fundamentals of communication. What assumptions are made when there's a lack of communication? Do you understand how other people best receive information? Have you ever had a message that was not received the way you intended? What happened? Why did it happen? 85% of our success is due to our personality and ability to communicate, negotiate, and lead. Only 15% is due to technical knowledge. That came from research out of Harvard, Carnegie, and Stanford. How we say things matter twice as much as what we say. I want to say, share something a friend of mine, Scott Stankiewicz, shared with me, and it's in my book, Rebound from Pain to Passion. He breaks down intention versus interpretation. Intention is singular. One person's intentions have a huge impact on others. Our intention is what we think. Interpretation is for the masses. Interpretation has a lifespan. People, those involved or not involved, bystanders, pundits, they are in charge of the interpretation. Interpretation is the variable we control the least, but we should be concerned with the most. Pretty powerful stuff. I appreciate Scott Stankiewicz sharing that with me. So what assumptions are made when there's a lack of communication? I think this is so important, especially in today's work environment. I'm going to pick on David Van Daff. You're always a star, David. And then Chuck.
I think it's an interesting question. And I always think when assumptions are made, it's typically the worst. It's never an accurate assumption, and I think very often people allow emotions to get involved with it, especially in high stress situations. I think that's the cleanest way of putting it, Coach D, is that you can't allow for the vagueness of assumptions in any type of situation, or you have to count on the worst ultimately in terms of the interpretation.
That's right. Chuck, what's on your mind?
I would say ditto to everything David just said. I think he was spot on. I think our normal reaction as people is if we don't have clarity there, I think it's just to become really negative. We go to the dark side really, really fast, and fear, uncertainty, and doubt are things that really raise up in our thoughts, and it does not lead to anything positive, but everything negative.
Chuck McAllister.
Well, the one thing I was going to say, and I appreciate the meeting as always, Coach, but assumptions, to me, being an independent sales guy, assumptions that I made before this pandemic and assumptions that I make now are completely opposite. Things that I assumed and tended to go, the thoughts I had in a positive way tended to go, my feelings before this. But my assumptions today, I've got to be honest, are not nearly as precise as they used to be. The business cycle that we live in right now, it's different. We all know that. The lack of clarity by people, whether it's talking like this, whether it's via text, whether it's via an email. It's hard to read people and to assume anything. Reactions that I get to things I do or, things I write or something like that, they're not there that they were like 2 years ago. And, I'm not part of a corporate structure or anything like that. So for me, that's hard. It really is.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a great point. I think that's a great point. I go back to, we talk about fundamentals like, people can relate to high school. And if you go out on a date and the girl doesn't call you back, that's not good. Like that's never good, right? And so like there's a vacuum there, and that vacuum gets filled. Our default emotion when there's lack of communication is negative. So you flip that around, and as a leader, sometimes we make assumptions like that person's good, right? They're good. My son was going through a challenging time. He's 24, going through a challenging time with his job. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, his boss gave him a gift card to Chick-fil-A for $30 with a note. And in the meeting, they told him, he worked for a builder here in Charlotte. They told him that he's doing a good job. And his like whole perspective changed because there was no feedback. So sometimes, and I'm one that, as in the DISC assessment as a D, driver, and I don't feel like I needed a lot of pats on the back, so I didn't give a lot of pats on the back. Boy, was I off base, because most people are S's in the DISC assessment, and they need security, they need harmony, they need to feel good, they need the pats on the back. And it's amazing how long one word of encouragement can go. Do you understand how other people best receive information? I think that's a critical component as well. I'm talking to a potential coaching client. He's an accountant. He's a C in the DISC assessment. He needs information. He needs data. So I have to think of, okay, how can I get data to him that shows that joining my Vistage group will be beneficial to him? I don't like a lot of data. Give me 1 or 2 pieces of data, but too much, just bogs my mind. I want to feel how you feel. I want to give me a couple of key points, and then I'll make a decision, sometimes too quickly. But that's me. So how do you have to understand how people best receive information. So how can you do that? I think understanding something like the DISC is important, because then you can put people in categories and realize, okay, I think that person's a C, they need a lot of information. Or I think they're an S, they need to feel really good about me before they make a decision. I can't push them, because if I'm pushing them, they're going to get uncomfortable. Terry, your hand's up, and then Brian.
Yeah, real quick, Matt. Pleasure to join everyone again. This is something I always look forward to. This is a bit of stating the obvious, but call it from the mid-'90s, we went from full interaction meetings, in-person, one-on-one meetings, to an email-driven society. And now, pandemic years, we are a text-driven society. People don't want to get a phone call anymore. They want to get a quick text so they can respond. So our communication has gone so solidly downhill, largely due to the technology that we all use, and the fact that we're, forever connected to a phone that we don't often use as a phone. So it's something to think about on the very basic fundamental of communication that's so rare one-on-one.
No, Terry, if 50% of communication, at least 50% of communication is body language, and at least 35% is tone. So if all we do is rely on text messages and emails, we miss 85% of the communication, the opportunity to communicate. And it goes back to the body language. Not only when you're speaking, they're reading you, but you're reading them. How are they seated? Are they leaned back? Are their arms folded? Are they looking you in the eye? Are they tapping their foot? You can't see anybody tapping their foot on a Zoom. You can't see anybody tapping their fingers on a Zoom. You can't really tell if they're that nervous. The only thing you see is I see Marlene's beautiful smile. That's it. And I see her flowers in the background. Brian, you're next up, then Marlene, and then Dave.
There's so much that goes into this topic, communication. And it's constantly changing. When do you receive the message? When does somebody send the message? When does somebody receive the message? Because, in an on-demand society, if I'm sending you a text message or an email, I send it to you in the morning and you receive it in the evening. A lot of things happen between the morning and the evening. But when there's a question about a message sent, that in that vacuum, you have to realize an unconscious bias between the sender and the receiver. You know, that when you don't have a clear, definitive explanation for a message, or the way a message was sent or received, then you input your own unconscious bias. So whatever you're feeling, if it's negative, if it's positive, it gets put into the message. So, and the other thing I just wrote down were people personas. You know, we talk about buyer personas a lot. People buy from you for different reasons. You know, you said, oh, I have an accountant. I need to approach it this way. Or I have a lawyer. That means I need to approach the conversation that way, right? You're going to approach people because they either buy you on convenience or quality or some unique selling proposition. It's the same thing with employees, right? People respond to different cues. So you actually have to keep almost a ledger. Like how I approach Bob is going to be very different than how I approach Sue or Tom or Linda. Because they'll respond differently, and you have to regularly update those cues to say, okay, things have changed. Maybe they're going through a difficult time, or maybe they're on a roll, and I should respond to them and keep that momentum going forward.
100%. I go back to the DISC assessment. I think that's simple to use. It's a simple tool. I use it with my clients, and I use it, and I talk about it's like a scouting report. If I were to scout an opposing player, and I know he's I see Rex Walters. Rex, it's great to have you on. Rex was a great play. You know, it's funny how Rex shows up after Kansas wins the national championship. I haven't seen Rex on this show ever. And then Kansas wins the national championship. Rex was an All-American at Kansas that I had the pleasure of coaching, and we worked together, and we're like brothers. But now he shows up all of a sudden. Kansas wins the championship, he shows up. I wonder if North Carolina won last night if he'd show up. Anyway, I think about scouting reports, like a scouting report on Rex, great shooter left-handed, so now I guard him accordingly. So if Marlene is an S in the DISC, I approach her accordingly. So everyone has a scouting report. I have clients that put the DISC assessment on the door of their employees. So when they go in, they're reminded how to approach that person. Marlene, what do you have for us today from the Netherlands?
Yes, from the Netherlands. Well, first of all, I have true tulip flowers here.
Yes.
I will dazzle you with the price. They are $5 for 50 tulips. So eat your heart out. Well, there's a lot of differences. What I wanted to talk about is, and I introduced that to you, Matt, that of course there is a communication, and we are all, well, if I look at the screen, most of all are white Caucasian people, and I'm then from a different culture, and so we communicate. I communicate in English, but sometimes maybe you don't understand what I mean because I have a different cultural background. One of the first examples I learned was when I arrived in the US and somebody made me a compliment. Dutch people are not very easy with compliments, so I had not learned to just say thank you and take the compliment. I just kept sizing it down. If somebody says that something is really good, I say, oh, that's nothing, or that's. And in the US, that's very impolite, I learned. So I had to learn to say thank you very much and send thank you notes, which we don't. We just open the present, say thank you, and then put it aside, and that's it. So I had invited my good friend Fernando Lancer to this meeting. He is a specialist in communication, and especially intercultural communication, and has written a few books on it. I studied intercultural communications in the US, and we had, like you, work with the matrix with the letters. There's also a matrix for cultures where you see if a culture is more inclusive, works in groups, or is more individualistic. And so you can label people more by their culture and see how you can approach them. So even though you both speak English, you also understand each other and don't end up like I did with a UK manager who told me that thought there was work to do, and he said that he appreciated it, but he actually meant it was crap. I didn't get that. He said, I advise you to do such and so. And I thought, well, if he advises to do so, I can do differently. But that, if you're British English, to advise means you better do it. Or so those kind of more nuances in communication, also in looking at, we talked about looking in the eye. Well, in some cultures, that's not very appreciated.
That's right.
And now we have, due to the pandemic, we have learned not to shake hands and still be polite. But it used to be very impolite if you didn't want to shake hands. But all over Arabic countries, it's not very usual to shake hands. And in Italy, they will kiss each other, men and women, when they meet each other. So there's different things that have more to do with language than just the language itself.
That's right.
For tips, I will put in the link. I will put the book of Fernando that he wanted to promote himself. So I'll put it in for some background reading on these subjects.
Thank you, Marlene. Dave.
Good morning, everybody. How you doing?
Good.
Okay, Matt. You know me. I'm all about behavior. It's always been in my 35 years of training animals at SeaWorld. And you come to realize if you were to go to SeaWorld, you watch the dolphins jump and splash and swim, et cetera, what you're doing is the product that you've purchased, that ticket, is the behavior of the animals. And we do 5, 6, 8 shows a day, 7 days a week. And you're paying to observe the behavior of animals. We have that behavior on a quality, consistent basis for that product. And yet we can't even tell those animals what to do. So if we can get quality, consistent behavior out of animals that we can't talk to, how come we can't do the same with people that we work with and can communicate with? Well, the way I view it in my years of doing management seminars, I've always said communication is defined by the ears, not by the mouth. And too often we try to spend so much time trying to be articulate, find the right words, find the right way, et cetera, et cetera. And it's all defined by the ears, which goes back to what's been mentioned earlier, the culture, the understanding, the different personalities, the different, hey, go to New York and order a hamburger and go to the South and order a hamburger. You have two different, environments, what's going on. Well, what I've done over the years in seminars, I would make a list of words, just words that we use on a regular basis. Always, usually, almost always, frequently, never, sometimes. And what I do is ask people to assign a percentage to each of those. Case in point, I use the phrase, when I go to get gas, I sometimes go inside and get something to drink. Now, what do you mean by sometimes? What percentage? Okay, the sun always comes up in the east, that's 100%. I sometimes get something to drink. That's what percentage? And I had everybody in the room write down those percentages. And then what I did was I collected them all and threw them up. I put them on a chart to see the scope and the variance of some of these words that people had. And what was amazing was, for example, usually, and I have these, I've saved these over the years, that I've accumulated them, usually went from as low as 30% to 99%.
Wow.
The same word. Now, think of this. Let's just say I am the one interpreting it as 99%, and Matt, you're the person that interprets it as 30%. I'm the boss, you're a subordinate. Here's the conversation. Hey, Matt, you're usually late to work. That's what I say. And you say, so? Because you're thinking 30%, I'm thinking 99%. And I'm saying, what's his problem? He doesn't get it. And you're saying, oh, he gets all worked up over nothing. So here are two people saying that, and they walk away with totally different interpretation of what is intended by that comment. Well,
that's powerful.
When I went through this with people, it was eye-opening. And and I did that at SeaWorld with my vice presidents. So here's a group of 12 people. We work together every single day. And I went through this exercise with them. And the disparity amongst those 12 people that work every day, it was eye-opening. It goes back to something you alluded to as far as the categories, how you interpret things. But again, I keep saying, communication is defined by the ears, not by the mouth.
Ears, meaning the person who's listening, the person who
Right.
is receiving the information. Stephanie,
Correct.
I'm sure you're scribing, right? And that's a Dave Force quote we need to put down. Communication is defined by the ears. You value the recipient more than the sender.
Right.
Because most people aren't going to question and say, I don't understand. Because that's embarrassing. So we need to make sure that we are clear. And it goes back to what Marlene said a couple of sessions ago, warm and clear. I think of that often, Marlene. We talked about warm, being more warm with our communication, but we also need to emphasize the clear part. Do you understand it?
Yeah, it's a difference. If we're talking in subjective terms versus objective terms, it's so easy to interpret them differently. That's the problem.
Yeah.
We speak subjectively.
Yeah, that's why I'm kind of really interested in the military. I've recently read a book, and it was all about that, the communication. They've got to speak quickly but clearly. It can't be usually, or why don't you think about turning right? It's turn right by X amount of degrees. And if
occasionally, sometimes. I mean, what does all that stuff mean?
Yeah. So, Brian Kennedy, your hand is up.
Yes, sir. I'm going to relate a very embarrassing story that relates to what Dave just talked about. And the difference is I didn't have 2 ears that were listening. I had 30. And I called the meeting together because I used my district managers when I was with American Greetings. I'd call them together to build strategies and make them part of that decision. And I asked at the end of one session, I said, is everybody clear on this? And every hand went up. They were all clear. And then over the next 30 days, I saw that the 15 people were doing 9 different things. But they were all clear. So I asked them at another time, I said, let me ask you a question. I thought everybody said you were clear on this. And they said, we were, and I'm doing exactly what I was clear on. What a slap in the face, and what. It was kind of like just saying, oh, that's why my forehead goes back a lot now.
Right.
Because I keep having a lot of those moments.
Yeah.
But that was one of those embarrassing things where I assumed that my guys understood what I was saying, and realized then that communication isn't what you're saying, it's what's received. And that supports Dave's time there very, very well. So just wanted to share that. And yes, I am embarrassed by it, but I did learn from it. So that's
listen, that's where you do your growing, learn and grow. You grow at the end of your comfort zone. And when you make mistakes, you want to fail forward. That's a John Maxwellism. That's why leadership is a practice. You never arrive. You have to practice. It's a skill like golf. It's a skill like medicine. It's a skill like law. That's why they call it a medical practice. I was talking to a doctor the other day. He says, if I go on a long vacation, I come back, I've got to use needles and inject people. And he says, that's a skill. So now I know that I am never going to schedule a physical on the back end of a doctor's vacation. That's the moral of that story. The book that I read recently is Turn the Ship Around. Turn the Ship Around. And it's about a captain in a submarine and how he empowered his people. And, it's all about communication. Brian Moran.
Well, it's funny. As we were talking about this, it hit me. This is probably the best example I have of miscommunication. 21 years ago, I was the associate publisher at Inc. magazine, and we were doing a redesign of the entire magazine. And it took us like 6 months to get everything out. But I actually have the issue right here. And it was the oversized ink and a woman on the cover. And we have been planning this issue for months and months and months. The story is about a band of small business owners that get together and they win a prime government contract worth $1 billion, which was huge back then. And the cover was called Unite. And so we had ads on buses and billboards, and we had we spent a couple $1 million on the whole thing. But we had ads everywhere. They're going to run in magazines and newspapers. This came out on September 4th, 2001. 2 weeks before we go to press, the managing editor changed the name of the cover. It was called Unite. So imagine, this is 7 days before 9/11. He changed the name, the cover from Unite to, can you see that?
Oh my gosh, no way.
Yeah. War. So 9/11 happens. 9/12, we're all at home. 9/13, and I'm working in New York City, right on the corner of 42nd and Lex, literally across the street from Grand Central. And I go into the office on September 13th, and, you know, we're all in shock and whatnot. And I'm sitting down and we're talking, everybody, you know, a lot of people came into the office, and the phones start ringing. And it's people who are irate. They're screaming at us. How could you publish? How could you try and make money off of what just happened 2 days ago? And it's like, you know, you have to understand, like we did this months ago.
Right.
And on the cover of every magazine and newspaper was the word war. And that's probably like the greatest example I can think of where, you know, the timing of the message from the sender to the receiver and how life's moments change. Mm-hmm. And I spent the rest of the next 3 days calling every place where we had that ad. I said, you know, you can't run it. Take the billboard down. Take off the stop all mailings and whatnot.
Yep.
It was unbelievable. And the backlash that we got, you know, and all of the money that we had spent on that issue, literally completely down the drain over something that we had no control over. But the message was already out there, and something changed between the time that we sent it and the time it was received.
Yeah, it could be catastrophic.
Yeah.
What are some great examples of great communication? I saw an article yesterday on Dawn Staley, the women's coach at South Carolina, and she worked with an executive coach, Felicia Allen, and her husband in Charlotte, and really worked on culture. They had a very obviously a very talented team, but there were assumptions made that the players knew what their roles were, that they were all come together as a team. I think we project our values on others. And what she did was intentionally define roles. You know, that's a form of communication. If you work in my organization, you know, you do this, you do this, you do this. It was clear, concise, simple. And as a result, every player knew their role. They didn't have to like their role, but they knew their role. And when they won the championship, I didn't see this, but she made a point of mentioning every player on the bench, that the names of the players that were, you know, bench players when they were receiving the championship trophy. Very intentional. And that's communication in itself, is defining roles, because you're removing the ambiguity of what am I supposed to do? How am I looked upon? If the head coach gets sick, who's going to take over the program in that person's absence? So what are some examples of good communication? And I'm going to go and pick on somebody that is new, but has been around some of the best leaders in sports, and that's Rex Walters. So Rex, you still here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Rex, again, was a great player at the University of Kansas. I had the pleasure of coaching. We went to the 1993 Final Four. Ironically, Kansas was coached by Roy Williams. we lost to North Carolina with Dean Smith. Dean Smith won his second championship there. And Rex has gone on to play in the NBA, coach in the NBA, been a college coach, played for Pat Riley, who's probably a master communicator. Any examples, Rex, of good communication that you've been a part of through your pro career?
Yeah, well, I've been around some great ones. I'm going to actually talk about one that just hit me recently. I got a chance to call the Northwest Missouri State game, the Division II National Championship, and I got to watch Ben McCullum coach his team, and I asked him about how he gets his players, right, to completely buy into their program and his system, because it's the most impressive I've ever seen, and I've been around great ones. And it takes me back to what Stan Van Gundy tried to do in New Orleans, and we didn't get it quite done, but Ben's been able to do that. He says, I really talk to our guys not about what they can't do, but I talk to them about what they're great at. And I want to get them to play to their greatness. And so I've never seen a team where they had one great player, like one really good player, like an all-time Division II, and everyone else was just okay. I mean, athletic, good players, solid, whatever. But it was the most impressive. Like, and I went to his practice the day before. I went to his shoot-around the day of. His communication was spot on. He could laugh at himself. He was asking questions. There was a play that he put in that the guys were confused on, and he took it like, no, this is not going to work. This is on me. We're not running this play. This is a bad play. Like, it was is just a clinic for 3 days. But I think the most impressive thing that he talked about was, like, I don't talk to them a lot about what they can't do. I'm really into getting them playing to their greatness. And so you're talking about guys like, I told him this, like, I feel like you got like 3 Draymond Greens out there where they're all looking for the best shot for their team. Mm-hmm. And so that was about as impressive a performance that I've seen from a team. And it really started with Ben and how he got his guys to believe in what they do great. And I mean, they beat a team that was clearly more athletic, bigger, stronger, faster, and they beat them running away. And that's because of his communication and getting his guys to believe in what they're great at.
Yeah, that's terrific. That's great insight. Stephanie, I'd like you to describe that for sure. Talk to your people about what they can be great at and attribute that to Rex. That's so key, because I know I was labeled a find the flaw kind of coach. So I'd be like, no, you're not good at this, so don't do that. And I like how you framed it, Rex. And that, you know what that is? We had a speaker, Werner Barkhusen, Dr. Werner Barkhusen, a psychologist. And he said, good leadership is manipulation with good intent. Good leadership is manipulation with good intent, because the word manipulation sounds like it's bad. Like, you know, you're manipulating somebody, and nobody likes to be manipulated. But if you're manipulating with good intent by telling the players, you're great at this, you know, you're a great shooter, run to the corner and get open, versus you're basically telling them, I don't want you handling the ball. Right? You're not a good ball handler, but you're great at this. So that's manipulation with good intent. And I think great leaders do that. How about what's not good? You know, some things that we get sloppy. Communication is a practice. It's a skill. And we all get sloppy. We use filler words. I think, you know, we've got to get those out of our vocabulary. And instead of using filler words, and Danny Dolan is on the call. Danny and I spent time talking about this. We were together about a week ago in Atlanta. And the power of the pause. And we've talked about this before. But it's much more powerful to use a pause than it is to fill the void with a like, you know. So I'm going to go to work today, you know, and probably talk with a couple of clients. You know, instead of saying, I'm going to work today, I'm going to talk to a couple of clients. I mean, it just is more, to me, comes across with more authority, more clarity. I think the receiver will respect that more. There you go. I said, I got to get rid of that. And so that's practice. That's a habit. That's like going to the driving range and trying to get rid of something in your golf swing. We need to hold each other accountable. And that takes practice, and that takes being able, like Rex said, to be able to laugh at yourself and make fun of yourself and be willing to be vulnerable and have an accountability partner that you say, hey, I don't want to say like or anymore. So I need you to track that for me. And when I do, call it out or give me a signal. The other things that I don't like in communication is people that interrupt, people that top. And when I learned about this term topping, it really hit me with some people that do it. And it's annoying. It's egotistical. I could tell somebody, like Danny Dolan and I played golf last week at Eastlake, which is a famous golf course in Atlanta. So I might see somebody, they say, how's it going? I said, great. What you been doing lately? Well, I played golf down in Atlanta, Eastlake, which is one of the nicer courses in the country. And then they might say, oh, that's nothing. I played at Augusta last week. Like the topping where it gets so competitive, and I'm a competitive person, but like that's just they're thinking about me, or somebody who says I all the time. I. Those are things that are very annoying, or if somebody obviously is not listening or goes off the flow of a conversation, someone's telling a story, and all of a sudden they're talking about seeing a play in New York, and the next thing I bring up is going to a Knick game in the Garden. Like that, like listen with the intent to understand. Don't be thinking about what you're getting ready to say next. I think that's critical. And again, it can be practiced. Tiffany, welcome to the webcast.
Thank you so much, Matt. When I talk to clients, I always mention, you said going back to high school, I call it a bad date. And I love the fact that the majority of this call are mostly men, and that you guys communicate, I find you communicate a little bit differently. Bottom line on top, you know what I mean? Let's get to the point. And I think that it's really important to soften things up a little bit and warm them up and be a good date. It's the easiest thing I can say. I mean, I know for some of you guys, it's been a while since you dated. It's not pretty out there. So think about it.
So tell me, give those that are in the market some tips, Tiffany. This might turn into like Match.com. We might compete with Match.com. Go ahead.
So I love it. I also want to share this. It's called Captivate. I don't know if any of you heard of Vanessa Van Edwards. She has a company called Science of People. It's the master of people skills. I first saw her on the School of Greatness podcast. I love Lewis Howes. Her stuff is it's stuff that we know. I know there's a lot of coaches on this call, but it's really paying attention to nonverbal cues, how your hand gestures are. You know, we have been in these Zoom. It's funny, I was just in a meeting with all CFOs, which is a totally different thought process and mindset in the way they communicate. But once again, you still listening with the ears, asking questions, softening things up, being a little bit warmer. And I know it's easier for, I'm going to say, women to do that. And sometimes men in their communication, it's right to the point, bottom line on top. So really taking a step back and paying attention to how that message is going to be received.
Mm-hmm.
But Captivate is one of her books, and it's amazing. Her podcasts, her YouTubes, real quick, easy things to soften up your skills or paying attention to others.
And Stephanie, can you make sure we put that in the notes? Tiffany, can you put the
I sure
person's
can.
name in the chat?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Oh gosh, thank you. I appreciate your
Be a good
input.
date, guys.
Huh?
Be a good date.
Listen, talk. Yes.
Ask questions. Pay attention.
In Mandarin, we had a speaker last month at our Vistage meeting, and the gentleman who's the chair with me, in Mandarin, the symbol for listening basically encompasses the whole body. It's, listening, it's the brain, it's the heart. You listen with your whole body. Jeff Colman, welcome. I don't believe you've been on this webcast before. Tell us where you're from.
I have not. So good morning, everybody. I'm based in Indianapolis. I run one of the business units for Comfort Systems USA, a mechanical contractor. So, it's interesting as I listened to everybody talk, Rex was talking about playing to strengths as opposed to weaknesses. And Dave was talking earlier about what I call fat words, those words that, you can't define in there. And years ago, I learned a lesson relative to communicating feedback, which these days is all that much more important with the younger generations. And it's not using the word but, especially when there's constructive feedback. It's interchanging that with the word yet. So, you're a great shooter, but you can work on your dribbling. You used your example earlier, Matt. You're a great shooter, yet if you could work on this, and just that slight nuance is great, I found, in providing constructive feedback.
So substitute yet for but.
Yep, that's it.
Love it. Steph, I know you're putting that down. That's a good one, Jeff. Appreciate the participation, and thanks for being willing to share, especially on the first call.
You're welcome.
Yes, sir. What about, since Zoom is a big part of our lives now and will probably be here forever, how about I talk about our Zoom game? How is your Zoom game? And I think about your backgrounds. I think about the angle of the camera. I think about your mic. All those things are so important now, more than ever before. So I've tried to elevate my laptop on a lift. So now hopefully it's eye level. I put in the virtual background, the Coach Daugherty coaching practice for branding. I need to do a better job of looking into that camera. I have a hard time looking at that camera because I want to see your facial reactions. So when I'm looking at Brian Moran right now, which is hard as hell to do, I'm looking at Brian Moran right now. I am not obviously looking at the screen. So now you just went away, Brian. Thank you. So now I'm looking, and you probably feel like I'm looking at everyone individually. But now I see nobody. I see the top of Dave's head because he's on the top in the middle. But now I can't see how you're reacting. That's a discipline that I need to work on, that Brian does a great job of telling me what I'm not good at after these meetings. He sends me a review, and it's terrific. But I think every time he says, look in the camera. And I don't look in the camera. I'm trying to look in the camera, Brian. All right, Chucky from Garden City. What do you got, Chuck?
Thanks, man. Just as a sidebar here, because you mentioned about Zoom and how we're all using it, obviously because of the pandemic and not being able to directly and, in person interact with each other, as I would think a lot of us in the past, that would at least for myself, used to be the go-to. I like to sit in a room, look someone in the eye and kind of communicate. But this whole Zoom thing has created basically off of this pandemic, basically a new industry in and itself because of Zoom, with plastic surgery and all that type of manicuring and maintaining yourself when you get on the screen. Like you said, Matt, look in the screen. People, let's say 4 or 5 years ago, weren't so attuned and so in mind to think that, all these things that now we do, how do you look? What's on my screen behind me? How do I present myself? Do I shave? Do I not shave? What shirt should I wear? All these types of things with Zoom has created a whole different mindset that I hear a lot of my nieces and nephew or the Gen X and stuff like that, where they talk very openly about how they have to prepare, and the whole idea behind whether it's a Zoom or a team meeting or what it may be, just the focal point of that. It's amazing to me of how we've gone completely full circle on that. And us older folks, where you can't teach an old dog new trick, it's a little concerning for me at times. I'm getting much better at it, but for the younger folks and being able to communicating, this is their form. This is all they know. And, it's just an interesting perspective.
Well, it goes to a point that someone made, I don't know if on this call, but in the past, like when we think of mentoring, we think of older to younger, but we should also think of mentoring younger to older. And maybe Dave, you may have mentioned that a couple of webcasts ago, but you should have your kids coach you up on your Zoom game and your technology and what's cool in texting. Like I found out, like it's not cool to put periods in text messages. Like that's not cool. So, I'm trying to get a little hip, with the text messaging. So, I don't put periods anymore, but that makes me nervous because if I don't put periods in text messages, my email game might get sloppy and I don't put a period in an email. So I'm an all or nothing kind of guy. But anyway, Kent, you're up next, then Keith.
All right, sounds good. Well, listen, I always find these forums incredibly beneficial, and this one's no exception today, too. So great comments in the chat. A couple quick thoughts, I guess, and this is one thing that I've found over time is that the quality and the clarity of my communication is generally directly proportional to the quality of the relationship that exists with who I'm communicating with. And generally, where there's high relational equity, there's high trust. And where there's high trust, there's a lower probability for misunderstanding when it happens, because you have track record, you have history with somebody, and a misspeak or a word that's not used appropriately can often get overlooked or reinterpreted because your actions over a longer period of time, as you've developed relational equity, will override that, at times. Doesn't take away our responsibility to be as clear as possible, but I do find that the quality of that relationship has a lot to do with the clarity of the message that we begin to send.
That's really deep and key, because I think in addition, when you're talking about that, if you and I have a real good relationship and I don't understand something, I'm going to be more comfortable asking you, Kent, what did you mean by that? As opposed to if don't have a great relationship, I'd be embarrassed to ask you that question. And so,
yeah, no doubt. And I think the other thing too goes is when there is a conflict or where there's a difference of opinion or direction, on a key topic or a key, initiative, maybe in your business or in what you're doing, then it's easier to be able to talk about those openly and honestly and go, I don't think that's the right way. Here's why. And it provides for better conversation because that relational equity is deep.
Yeah. Well, we've got about 7 minutes to go. Keith, tell us where you're from and what you do.
Hey, Coach. Thanks for having me, and thanks, Tiffany, for inviting me. I'm one of the few native Charlotteans. I'm born and raised in Charlotte, North Carolina, so I was listening to you on 610 radio when you talked about Dawn Staley and Felicia, whatever, on the show. And I'm with Tryon Medical Partners here in Charlotte. And I guess I had a little bit more of a question I wanted to throw to the group is, we know, I personally know that it's a lot better to connect with people face to face. Zoom is a good complement, if you can't meet someone face to face. I'm having a little bit of problem with some of the individuals that are just stuck that would much rather rely on a Zoom call instead of, grabbing coffee or getting lunch or just, coming by their office. So didn't know, you guys' thoughts on getting people that inertia to be able to get them to move to be able to do more face to face as everybody's kind of having a hard time coming out of this pandemic.
Yeah. Anybody with any thoughts on ways to get people to unzoom and meet in person? I would say, offer to buy me lunch and I'll meet you in person.
Yeah, David said the same thing. Yeah, food is a universal. You can't not communicate properly with food.
Right.
Buy me a ticket first then, Matt.
What's that?
Buy me a ticket first then.
Okay, buy me a ticket first. That's right. So that'll be an expensive meal, Marlene.
Yeah.
If anybody has any ideas about how to get people out of their comfort zone now, which is Zoom, and meet in person, please put it in the chat for Keith and all of us. Keith, thank you and welcome.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
All right, David, then Danny, and then I'll close.
I just had a quick thing because you brought something up, Matt, that I thought of a little bit earlier. When you're saying in texting, it's not cool to use periods. I've not heard that before.
Well, you're not hip, you're not hip like me, Dave. You gotta hang out with the cool guys, Dave.
Yeah, that's right. But here's my point. As we get into this texting, and grammar has seemed to go by the wayside, spelling has seemed to go by the wayside. Everything's abbreviated. Everything is so the communication style is changing. If we look at our age differences, I'll put it mildly out there. We judge people based on that. You talk about, Kent was just talking about quality of communications. Well, if I get a text from someone with what I refer to as spelling errors, grammatical errors, punctuation errors, guess what? Your integrity has just dropped somewhat. And I am not necessarily hearing the message you're trying to convey because the quality has impacted my interpretation. That's an issue anymore.
Well, I think here's the key, Dave. To me, it's who has the leverage in the relationship. If I need you and you're my boss, we go back to the receiver is more important than the sender. You're more important, so I better, what's the scouting report on Dave? Well, he likes this, this, and this. This is how he receives information. So I'll cater it to you. But if you're trying to recruit me to your organization and I'm 25 years old, you better know how to text.
Yeah.
And you better know how to text in a kind of a current way. Otherwise, you might not get me.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That's the reality. So you got to have the leverage. I think it's all about leverage. Danny, what do you got, Danny? Let me unmute you, Dan. Unmute.
We good?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, just to follow up a couple things you said, Matt. Last week we talked about the power of the pause, and we were with Bobby Jones IV talking about his great-grandfather, his grandfather. But the power of the pause, as you mentioned, not as a filler, but as a way of listening, that you're really listening before you respond, and kind of feeding back on a couple of things I already mentioned, but not spewing out the answer before you're listening to what the question was is really important. So
that's right. That's.
I run a group of salespeople, and kind of this conversation here this morning talking about kind of the mode of communication and whether it's text, phone calls, Zoom calls, in person. I have a team of people that can't wait to get back out there, get in front of people, have lunches, and do things. But I think what we got to think about is, we're talking about this as the receiver being more important than the person that's delivering the message. How does the receiver want to do this? We want to do all this stuff again because that's the way we used to do it pre-pandemic, but the world has changed a little bit, and we have to read the audience and see what's the best way to communicate with them, whether that truly is in person again, or we continue to do some of the things we've been doing in the last couple of years.
Yeah, good stuff, Danny. Yeah, Bobby Jones, a legendary golfer whose home course was East Lake, had a disease that Danny's cousin and a childhood friend of mine suffers from. So we were doing a fundraiser, and Bobby Jones IV was there representing the Jones family. And yeah, talked about the pause. When somebody asks a question or make a comment, that pause can be powerful. It shows great respect that I'm really considering what you say before I respond. So we got 2 minutes here. This quote from Rob Brown struck me, was appropriate for this call, this webcast. If you can speak, you can influence. If you can influence, you can change lives. Let me repeat that. And notice the pause. Notice there's no ums. I mean, this is pretty good, isn't it? I mean, right? If you can speak, you can influence. If you can influence, you can change lives. And that's from Rob Brown. So, what books are you reading? How many books are you reading a month? I just told you I finished up Turn the Ship Around, and that's all about communication and empowering, and it's about culture. It was a good book. What are you reading now? Our next meeting, again, the first Tuesday of every month, and I challenge, and Tiffany, you're a good recruiter. Thank you for recruiting. Was it Dave? Dave from Keith. Keith, thank you for recruiting Keith.
You're welcome.
Let's get some more women on here. Let's get some more people of color, and to make this even a more dynamic webcast. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Stephanie will put some notes together and get the video on the website and out to you all as soon as possible. See you all next month. Have a great day.